Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. So let's get into the coaching carousel, and let's start with the jobs that are already open. Maryland opened really 2-3 weeks into the season. Mark Turgeon's the head coach. Maryland takes a few losses, and Mark Turgeon's just like, I'm done. I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want to do this job anymore. I'm taking my check, and I'm bouncing. And I don't even think he took a check. I think he just said, I quit. Keep your money. I don't want this job anymore. And so Maryland opened, and then obviously a few weeks ago, Louisville opened. And I bring it up because, to me, I think there's a very interesting parallel between what happened in football that I just talked about and what is happening in basketball right now. If you remember in football, early start to the season, USC fires Clay Helton essentially 2 weeks into the season. I mean, they fired him week 2, middle of September, which is crazy to think about. And there's this big talk about who could get the job, James Franklin this, blah, blah, blah. And then about a month later, LSU opens, and we kind of stopped talking about USC and put all of our attention to LSU. And I bring it up because as the season went on, we talked more and more LSU, less and less USC, and then a funny thing happened. The jobs were actually filled, and boom, Lincoln Riley, out of nowhere, takes the USC job. He hasn't even been linked to them, and LSU ends up getting a really good candidate in Brian Kelly, but we spent all this time talking LSU, and I think the candidate that LSU wanted, USC ended up getting. And so I bring it up because I do see some parallels between the Maryland and Louisville situation. I'm not saying that Maryland is a better job than Louisville. I think they're kind of two different jobs, maybe in a lot of the same ways that USC and LSU are different jobs. Louisville, I think you could argue, maybe one of the 5 best jobs in college basketball. The thing about Louisville is, like Kentucky, like Kansas, like LSU football, like Alabama, Ohio State football, Louisville will give a coach anything that they need to win. A new practice facility, weights, dorms, resources, travel, recruiting budget, whatever you need to win, Louisville will do it. Maryland, unfortunately, they don't quite have the budget that Louisville does, but Maryland does have one thing that few programs in college basketball have, which is maybe the best recruiting base in the country in the Maryland-Baltimore County area. I think they call it not Maryland-Baltimore County, the DMV, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. And so these are considered 2 of the best jobs. And why I see the parallel is because all of our focus right now is on Louisville. And I think Maryland is quietly behind the scenes starting to make their moves. And I think Maryland is going to end up with a really good head coach when this is all said and done. My understanding of the Maryland coaching search is that essentially Maryland is treating their job opening as if it is one of the elite jobs in college basketball, which many would say it is, right? Maryland's made multiple Final Fours. Maryland has won a national championship this century back in 2002. They have a great recruiting base. And so my understanding is Maryland is pursuing this coaching search as if they have one of the 10 best jobs in the country and that no candidate is off limits, which, by the way, I absolutely love. I think all of these big-time jobs should approach it. I don't think you should ever assume that a candidate is off the table, especially when you have as much to offer as Maryland and Louisville. I do think the one thing with Maryland that is worth keeping an eye on, financially, do they just have the resources to be able to go out and get whoever they want, right? Maryland, I think the history of Maryland, if you follow their athletic department, it is well known. They just don't have the money that other schools and other programs do, and that's kind of proven in how Maryland ended up in the Big Ten in the first place. If you remember, 6-7 years ago when Maryland goes to the Big Ten, why does it go to the Big Ten? It goes to the Big Ten essentially because they need the money from the Big Ten TV contract. They're going to double their money or whatever it was. And so because of it, Maryland essentially went to the Big Ten to bail out their athletic department, which was hemorrhaging money at the time. Now, I would argue it was the wrong decision. I would argue it's hurt the athletic department more than it's helped it, but there is no doubt that those checks from the Big Ten Network and from the Big Ten TV contracts are certainly helping Maryland right now, but I just don't know if Maryland can go get a head coach that makes, I don't know, let me give you an example. People are talking about Andy Enfield, the USC coach, potentially as the next head coach at Maryland. And you'll sit there and say, well, why is Andy Enfield a candidate? Well, Andy Enfield is from Pennsylvania. He went to college in Maryland at Johns Hopkins, and there's a belief that he wants to get back to the East Coast and do all that. Have not talked to Andy Enfield about it. He's been a friend of the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast, but I have not talked to him about it. But the reason I bring it up is that Andy Enfield reportedly makes $3 million a year. Now, it's hard to know exactly if that number is accurate, simply because of the fact that USC is a private school and we don't know the actual numbers of salary for any of these guys. But if Andy Enfield makes $3 million a year, you would think that Maryland probably has to pay $4.5, $5 million to get him to leave USC. And oh, by the way, you're going to have to pay a buyout, and you're going to have to pay, money for a coaching staff and all that good stuff. So I bring it up because I do believe that Maryland is doing its due diligence. I do believe that Maryland is pursuing candidates as though it's an elite program. I just guess the question that I have is, will they have the money? If it's a coach that's, a $4 or $5 million buyout and you got to pay him $4 or $5 million to come, do they have that kind of money? I don't know. But my guess is that Maryland ends up with a better coach than we're expecting because, again, they had a jump start. It reminds me a lot of USC football, that is, and I believe that they're going to end up with somebody pretty good. In terms of Louisville, really quick, listen, the same problems that Louisville had 2-3 weeks ago when we last spoke about that Louisville job, I think are still there, right? First of all, I think we all know Bruce Pearl's not going to be the head coach. Signs a lifetime contract. Credit to Bruce Pearl. Signed it just 2 days after joining the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. I don't want to say I had anything to do with it, but I can't definitively say that I didn't. But with that said, Bruce Pearl's off the table. And I think it's hard to really know who realistic candidates are at Louisville, right? Interim AD, school president still in flux. And as I've said many times, it's going to be hard to convince a great coach to leave a good job without knowing who the permanent AD and the permanent school president are. With that said, though, like I said a minute ago, Louisville is one of those schools that if they have to pay a $5 million buyout and then have to pay $6 million a year for a head coach, that is something that they are willing to do. Obviously, the big names at Louisville, the ones that jump out, first of all, Kenny Payne, I still think is very much a candidate at Louisville, as he should be. Louisville alum, longtime assistant at the high major level of college basketball at first Oregon, then a long time at Kentucky. It's also worth noting he's one of the highest paid assistants in the NBA, but the New York Knicks aren't doing very well, and there's already talk that Tom Thibodeau might not survive very much longer. So to me, Kenny Payne is still the favorite. If I had to bet money on it, I would project that Kenny Payne is your next head basketball coach at Louisville. The obvious interesting name outside of Kenny Payne that keeps popping up, it is UCLA head coach Mick Cronin. And again, Mick Cronin, friend of the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast, have not talked to him, don't know if he would realistically be interested in taking the job. But what I would say is, I don't think it's as crazy as people think to, in this specific case, for the UCLA head coach to leave for Louisville. First of all, Mick Cronin does have a big buyout, not an issue at Louisville. I don't know that they'd pay a buyout that size. I think it's $7-8 million, something like that. But if they think they can get the right coach, they're going to go ahead and pay it. I think Mick Cronin will have support. Remember, he was a guy that coached under Rick Pitino for a very long time, or not for a very long time, but for about 3 or 4 years. I think he knows how good that Louisville job can be, and I think he would embrace the challenge of going head-to-head with John Calipari all the time. Beyond that, I think it's worth noting, and I like Coach Cronin, so this isn't a criticism. It seems to me to be pretty clear that there are a lot of things that he's frustrated at UCLA about. Just this week, he came out and complained about the Pac-12 rescheduling all these games because of COVID, and essentially they've had to play like 6 games in 11 days or something. He's mad about that. He was mad about not having fans in the stands a few weeks ago, which to his credit, I completely understand. He was mad about the COVID policies dating back to a year and a half ago in the summer of 2020. Never forget, he came on the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast and basically said, UCLA, get our kids back on campus. They should not be at home. They need to be on campus with me. On the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast, he was criticizing the UCLA administration. Again, I don't think he was wrong, but it seems clear to me there's some frustrations at Louisville. And so because of it, those are the 2 big jobs. I do think what I'll probably end up doing, maybe if you follow me on YouTube at, Aaron Torres on YouTube, I'll probably do individual videos more breaking down the Maryland and Louisville jobs as well as a few others. So make sure you follow there. But those are my general thoughts on the Louisville and Maryland job.